So far, we've talked a lot about controlling your edges with selections and with alpha channels. And both of those things could be described as shape. As in, I know the foreground shape needs to look one way, or I only want to work on something in the windows, which is also a shape. But what if you want to paint only on locations that really aren't related at all with shape? What if, for instance, I only want to paint in the shadows? Not in a specific part of the image, just anywhere it's dark. This is where the amazing, in my opinion, and often overlooked, blend if comes into play. And this is in the blending options in the layer styles. Now, the words blend if might not mean anything to you, and they do sound a bit abstract. So let's see if I just wanted to paint brush strokes only over the shadows, and maybe what I want to do is add a little color into my shadows. I could just paint big strokes here, going way outside of the lines, but then set some rules for this layer. So I go into blending options, and at the very bottom here, it says blend if gray, and then it says this layer and underlying layer. And right now we're just going to focus on underlying layer. So my goal here is to only paint over dark values. So I'm just going to drag this arrow that's near the white down towards the dark, and you can see what's happening immediately. It is controlling the visibility of my current layer based on the layers below it, which is to say I want it to only be visible on top of dark. And if I want to do the opposite, I would just drag this one back to its place and move the lower arrow. And here it's only displaying on top of where it's light and not where it's dark. And to make it even cooler, I can separate this transition, because right now it's sort of a hard, messy edge. Well, if I hold down Alt, I can break these arrows apart a bit. And this just sort of softens that transition between where it's displaying and where it's not displaying. I never made a selection. I didn't have to have a path or an alpha channel. I could just say, I want to paint where it's dark, no problem. Blend if, gray, and then work with the underlying layer. Okay, so let's see some practical examples of what this looks like. This is something I use all the time for overlays. So I've gone ahead and prepared some textural overlays that I got from cgtextures.com. I can't include them in the series because I don't have the rights to them, but there's a bunch of free textures at this site, so I encourage you to check it out. So let's say I grab this tan plaster, and I only want this to display on top of the gray and not on top of the red stripe. You can see here there's a red stripe underneath. Okay, so this would be blending options, blend if, underlying layer, and I'm going to play with these. So here you see when I turned off the bright values, it shows me that the stripe, the red stripe, is actually sort of dark. Well, that means I actually want to leave this arrow in place and move the lower clamp. There we go. And then I can soften it a bit if I want by breaking those arrows apart. So I'll click OK. Now you can see here that the layer is still 100% opacity, and I could drop it down a bit if you wanted to make it a little more subtle, but nothing is being displayed over top of that red stripe, and I did not have to make a single selection. Cool. Let's grab another one of these overlays. I'll pick the one with the green here. Let's say I only want this on the red stripe. So I would say blending options, blend if, underlying layer, and now I'll remove the brighter values. And there you can see I'm having a little challenge, because now the red stripe is not the only dark value. There's some extra dark values that came into play when I added this overlay. So in this case, blend if on its own might not be enough. But there's actually other ways around this problem. I've been using blend if gray, and what that's looking for is the value. Well, instead of a value, what I might want to do is a color. So I could choose this as blend if red, and this is just going to have a different effect. So there you can see it's only using a spectrum of the red channel, not the grayscale channel. And these are effects that really make more sense when you play with them yourself. So I would definitely encourage you to open up the resources folder and just mess around with some of my examples. Blend if is pretty abstract, and it's worth messing with. Okay, so that is the underlying layer. Now let's go ahead and grab this cement, and it's got these cool panel borders. And let's say all I want on my cement wall are these panel borders. Well, one way I could accomplish that would be the other half. Blend if gray, this layer. So now I am ignoring what's below and I'm only considering the values of the current layer. And what I want are the dark values. I don't want any of the light values. So just like before, I'll remove the light values. And there I leave only the dark values. And if you want to, you can separate these arrows a little bit with Alt and just soften it up a bit. That is pretty cool. All right, I'll hide that one real quick. And let's say we wanted to do the opposite. We only want the white plaster. Well, same deal. Blend if gray, this layer, and then we'll just remove the dark values and we're left with only the light values. Once again, I did not have to make any selections. It was just a matter of which values to display. Now it gets even a little more complicated if you want to take advantage of both of those sliders at the same time. So to show an example of that, let's take these cracks here. I'll put them on the top of the layer stack. And my goal is to only have the cracks, so none of the cement between the cracks, but I don't want them to display on top of this white plaster. So I'm going to start by doing the blend if for this layer, as in I only want the dark cracks. So I'll lower the upper clamp so you can only see the dark values of this layer. But now I also want to modify the underlying layer, as in I do not want the cracks on top of the plaster. And in this case, the plaster is a pretty high value. So I'll also hide that here. It's going to be a fine balance because my gray wall is a pretty high value as well. But here, let's look. So you can see I have cracks that look like they're underneath the plaster, and none of that original cement is visible. So you could imagine the power of this is pretty strong. Here I am deciding where I want something to be based on the color that it sits on top of, or in the case of an overlay, based on its own colors. So here if I wanted to paint only on the bright areas, which would be a nice way to paint the background, I can do the same effect with a painted layer. So here I'm going to make a test stroke just so you can see what I'm doing. And then I'll change the blending options to remove the lower values. Oops, wrong one. Remove the lower values of the underlaying layer. And there you can see at some point I'll hit a threshold where I'm only painting on the very brightest values. I could separate a little bit. And then I'd have the ability to just paint in the background without making any selections. And back in the illustration here, this might look like painting some glow. So here I'm just using a linear dodge layer and it's painting everywhere. I'm using a big soft brush. Well, if just at a glance I knew I did not want it to glow where it was dark, well, that would be easy. Blending options, blend if gray, underlying layer, because I want to paint only on top of light areas. So I just move this arrow a bit, and so I'm removing the visibility. You can see it's only now on the areas that are already bright in the image. And if you don't want that jagged, awful edge, you just soften that up a bit. And then I could continue to paint if I wanted, and you see the effect is a bit sloppy here, but really it's only affecting those light areas of the image. So as a way to get some quick experimenting done, or just to paint in one specific value range, this is hard to beat. Maybe you've got a nice textural brush that looks like this, and you just want to add some sort of surface details. And oftentimes in an illustration, it's nice to keep your shadows less detailed and your illuminated areas more detailed. So to do that, I would start by painting some sort of textured highlights around here. And then I would decide with blending options, that I don't want them displaying over top of shadows. So here they are only visible on the highlighted areas. And then once I've found a nice balance there, I can confirm that and then just keep painting, and I automatically avoid those shadows. As you can see, Blend If is very powerful, but it's also far from obvious. So when do I like to use Blend If in general? The way I usually think about it is when sentences like in the shadows, or I want to brighten the highlights, or tone down my oranges. These are not shape specific. These are value or color specific. Those are great opportunities for Blend If. Alternatively, if I said I want to work in the foreground, well, that would be shape specific, and so not a good candidate for using Blend If. If I said in the foreground, that would be a great option for maybe a path or an alpha channel. So despite the abstract nature, I strongly encourage you to get used to Blend If. It's one of those tools that is exclusively digital, so you might as well take advantage. It can save you a lot of time.